Welcome to this amazing interview that I have today, or this chat that I have today, with a dear friend that I have never met in real life. We've only met through the interwebs because we connected during that point in the quarantine where we couldn't even meet in person, even though we coincidentally live in the same state. But she and I are both super passionate about politics, about voting rights, about being politically active. And I think that's why we get along so well. And we do have a coffee date scheduled for the future once we're both vaccinated and allowed to socialize in public. If you don't know me, I'm Sylvia Salazar. I founded Tono Latino, which is a platform to inform people about politics, specifically focused on Latinos, because a lot of media outlets kind of ignore us. And my passion is just showing people that politics is not boring. Your turn. Who are you?
I am Tokyo. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. This is going to be fun. And I founded Political Charge, which is a blog that's very focused on what's happening in politics today, but more importantly, what you can do about it. So I became very passionate about finding a way to take action after the 2016 election, like so many others. And I channeled that into social media. Yes, you too. And I channeled that first into social media until I had friends who said, you really need to do this in long form. And so I took it to a blog and it's grown and grown since then.
We have that part in common because whoever knows my story knows that I didn't know or didn't pay much attention to politics. Like you said, so many of us that didn't wake up until 2016. And both you and I changed our lives significantly and started putting a lot of our time and effort into this. And to me, honestly, it was a big surprise that I didn't know I would be as passionate about this, because I remember growing up, I didn't grow up in the US, but whenever I had democracy class, don't ask me anything about democracy class that I took in 10th grade, because I remember nothing. All I remember is how much I hated it. And to find myself now obsessed with politics and how government works is kind of, I think, like the universe is mocking me, to be honest. But now I'm obsessed with showing people, like, hey, it doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be like when I was little and I took democracy class and I just wanted to like jump out a window, but my classroom was on the first floor, so it really wouldn't have done anything. But you and I can make politics fun. I know that we can make it fun. We've had some pretty interesting times going viral on TikTok at times when we show people what's going on or what they can do to change things. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this chat, one thing that you and I are both really passionate about is making it easier for people to vote, or the fact that a lot of people are working very hard to make it harder for people to vote, also known as voter suppression. And it's going everywhere in the country. We're at 47 states right now, 47 states
Yep.
passing, trying to pass, or having passed already hundreds of laws or bills to try to make it harder, more inconvenient for people to exercise their right to vote. And so that's one thing that you and I can talk about a lot. And that's why you and I are here.
Yes. Very true.
And one of the reasons why you went viral on TikTok is because you discussed this one thing that those on the right are obsessed about when it comes to voting: voter ID. Why don't you give us a little bit of a background on what's the deal with voter ID? How are states that don't require this voter ID working? Which, by the way, they're very secure. We live in one of them.
Yes.
And I can also bring up some examples comparing two states, how one is making it easier for people to vote and the other one isn't.
Yeah. So, when it comes to voter ID, what I've learned very quickly whenever I bring up voting rights, especially in the social media space, is that conservatives only see voting rights as a voter ID issue, and they do not understand why we don't like it or what the problem is and why can't you show your identity. And before I answer that question, I just want to take it one step back about what actually voting rights, at least how I define it, is. For me, it's about, making sure that we are not putting any kind of barriers in front of eligible citizens in order to vote. So whenever we see barriers coming up, and those can look, those barriers look a lot of different ways, and I know we're going to discuss that today. Voter ID is only one of many ways that we see Republicans trying to make it harder for certain people to vote, right? But as Sylvia said, people on the right are absolutely obsessed with voter ID. So I had a viral video on TikTok where I essentially said that I think voter ID laws are dumb. You might as well be controversial if you're going to be on social media. The reason why I say that is because the incidence of voter fraud, the specific kind of voter fraud, impersonation fraud, going to the ballot, going to the poll in person, pretending to be somebody else and voting in that person's name, is beyond rare, right? And so again, I'm going to rely on others for my research. I rely on the Brennan Center a lot. Really great place to get really good voting rights information. By their estimation, by multiple different reports, over a 14-year period and well over 1 billion votes cast, there are 31, not 31 million, not 31,000, 31 under, what do you have, verified voter impersonation ID problems, right? And so they've been convicted for that. 31.
Let's say those numbers again. Out of 1 billion, over 1 billion votes cast,
over a 14-year period,
31 cases of documented voter fraud.
Yeah. So
but we want to put so much energy into fighting this thing that never happens.
Yeah. And so again, we can talk about why it doesn't happen. It's just, first of all, it's very, very hard to do, right? It's hard to do. The payoff is nothing. You change one vote, right? And yes, every vote counts, but you know what? You know how many elections aren't turned on one vote? Right? And so you are essentially, as a single person, going to the polls and trying to vote in somebody else's name. You're risking a huge fine, which you probably can't afford, and 5 years in jail, and you never, ever, ever get to vote again. That's what you're looking at if you get caught doing this thing that's incredibly hard to do. So the reason why I started off that video by saying voter ID laws are dumb is because we're trying to solve a problem that literally does not exist. It just doesn't, statistically does not exist. And so again, we have to look at why this huge push. Why about the voter ID? Well, and I'll give the conservatives credit on this one. It makes sense, right? That when you go to the polls, you have to prove who you are, and voter ID does that. And they love to make all these comparisons. Well, I need to show my ID when I buy beer, right? That's a favorite one. I have to show my ID when I buy beer. And I'm like, okay, well, last time I checked, you don't have to register in advance with your state, with your name and all of your information to get registered to buy beer, right? Nor do you have a list of all the people who are eligible to buy beer at all the all the liquor stores around your state. So it's a little bit different. It's a very weird comparison to make. So, but again,
you can only go buy beer at one specific liquor store near where you live.
Right.
And they have a list with your name. And you can only come and get that beer for a certain amount of days.
Yeah, they like to make these comparisons. Again, they love logical fallacies. We understand this. And so it's something they hear from their politicians, though, and from their podcasters on the right. And they hear this over and over and over again. And it's just been drilled into them that if we're against voter ID, we must be against, right? We're clearly, we like fraud, right? That we're trying to encourage fraud, when that couldn't be further from the truth. The reason why people like myself don't like voter ID is because it's being used to suppress the vote, and again, they love to bring race into it. And it's not about race either, although we do know that there are certain populations that are disproportionately affected by voter ID. But the one that I use first off, just to kind of take it away from a racial argument, is that it's about, here's a statistic. It comes from the AARP. 20% of adults over the age of 65 don't have one. They don't have one, right? Think about a person who's living in a retirement home. They don't need to drive, right? There's a van that takes them to the grocery store, right? If they're not buying alcohol, again, and they're really old, they're probably not getting carded, right? There's all these reasons why they don't need an ID anymore. So are we saying that it's fine by us that 20% of adults over the age of 65 can't vote because they don't have an ID? Sounds like a barrier to me, and that's why I'm against it. There's plenty of ways that we can make elections perfectly secure, which they already are, as Sylvia said at the beginning of this video. We don't need voter ID, especially very stringent ones, to suppress the vote. That's what it does. It suppresses the vote.
And as I mentioned, Tokyo and I live in a state that has amazing voting laws because we all vote by mail. I'm sorry if you're not in Oregon and I'm making you jealous, but let me tell you, it is amazing. And only registered voters get ballots. And they know who we are because they already have a copy of our ID from the initial time that we registered to vote. It's not like we were impersonating anybody. They double check that you are, and you have to sign, I am the person. And obviously you get into trouble if you impersonate somebody else. But it's not like my husband, who lives in this house and is not a US citizen, also gets a ballot in the mail. He doesn't. He has an ID, but he's not a US citizen. He's not allowed to vote. Therefore, he doesn't get a ballot. The only ballot that arrives in my house is the one under my name. And I have seen what happens. You need to sign the envelope. Your address needs to match the address that you have on record with the board of elections in your county. And then when the ballot arrives, they compare it to the signature that you used to register to vote. And there are people literally monitoring that the signatures match. So, hello? Really? It's not like anybody's gonna, like, what the people on the right love saying is like, oh, that the Democrats are just trying to get their term, the illegals to vote. No. And I don't have to prove every time I vote, I don't have to include a photocopy of my ID, whatever it is that they want, or like they're making it in some of these states, multiple forms of ID, plus getting a witness that will sign at the same time as I am sealing the envelope to mail my ballot. Like what you were saying at the beginning, explaining what voter suppression is to you, reminds me of something that you and I both admire, Mark Elias. He's the founder of something called Democracy Docket, which is responsible for fighting so many of the lawsuits that came up after the 2020 election. Fan of him on Twitter, follow him and follow Democracy Docket, because both Doki and I are big fans of them and they do amazing work. But his sentence, he says it a lot nicer than I do. But basically he says, if you're not making it easier for people to vote, you're making it, you're at fault for voter suppression. It shouldn't be so hard for people to vote. And you and I, knowing how easy it is and how convenient and awesome it is to just get the voter pamphlet in the mail that you can study weeks prior to an election, so you have time to browse with your morning cafecito or whatever time of the day you want to, and then having the ballot arrive and you sit down, you fill it up. If you plan in advance, you just need to like put this thing, seal it. It's already prepaid envelope, so I didn't spend any money. Put it in the mail and make sure that it arrives. Or if you kind of wait until the last minute like I do, or just really, really want to make sure that it arrives in the elections office, then you personally go and drive to the elections office and drop it off at a specific ballot.
Yeah.
It's very easy and it encourages participation. So the easier you make it for people to vote, the more people will vote, because they don't have to take how many hours off of their day, because in this country you vote on a stupid Tuesday and it's not even a federal holiday. So that's another rant that I have. In Colombia, where I come from, we vote on Sundays.
Well, and again, that's something else that Oregon has, in addition to being all mail ballots. And we were the first, but we are now one of 5 states that does this. But we also paired it with automatic voter registration, right? So if you come into contact with your DMV, there's automatic, because you're using a government source, right? They just opt you in. Now, if you want to opt out, you can do that, but the onus is not on the voter, right? They just put you into the system to be registered to vote. And that just makes it so much easier. And we've seen the statistics over the 20 years that we've done this. You look at before and you look at after, and the participation among voters in elections clearly went up by a lot. I'm forgetting the exact statistics, but it went up by a lot. And we've seen this in each of the states that have done this, especially the twin, right? Automatic voter registration with mail balloting. It goes through the roof because it's easier. So
I wish everybody could have this.
I wish too. Hey, I moved up here from California. I thought I had it fairly easy there. No, Oregon has it hands down. Absolutely.
And then we have states that have been in the news a lot, like Georgia. Georgia has been in our mind since the November election, because not only because we were all waiting for them to finish counting their votes for the presidential election, but also because they had these 2 very contested Senate races that, honestly, I didn't think that the Democrats could win. And then because it was such a close election, due to the way the laws work in Georgia, if the candidate doesn't win by over 50%, then it goes to a runoff election. And so I don't know how you felt, but I felt like this runner in a marathon, and the finish line just kept moving away from me. Because in my mind, I'm not saying that I was planning on going on vacation, but I did need a break after 4 years of political activism and anger and frustration and checking Twitter every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning to see what kind of dumpster fire we were going to find. In my mind, I had told my husband that as of maybe November 10th, because I knew we were going to have a delay in getting the results, we could take a break as a family, that I could take a very, very long nap on November 10th. And then no, November 10th, it moved all the way until January 5th, which was the day of the runoff elections in Georgia, which thankfully both Democratic candidates won, Senator Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. But then the next day, when we were celebrating and dancing, at least I was dancing in my kitchen, we had the insurrection at the US Capitol. So I didn't get to sleep until I collapsed right after Joe Biden was sworn in.
Yeah.
I have always had a very delay in reaction with a lot of things.
Yeah.
Bad news, good news. Like, I don't process the good news, and it's funny because people are like, "Oh, you're not excited," and I get like excited a little bit later. I don't get sad when I have bad news. I go into execution mode, and then a week later, I just collapse in exhaustion, or like I go through my feelings. I didn't process any of this until like I was able to take a deep breath, because we had a new president.
Yeah.
And we had a new president and a new vice president. So making sure there was a backup plan there. And then I collapsed. And then I needed like 10 days to just breathe.
Yeah.
And Georgia gave us majority, the slimmest majority in the Senate. Because if it hadn't been for Georgia, the Republicans would still control the Senate. Mitch McConnell, that nasty, nasty man, would have control of what gets voted on or brought up to discussion or everything. Thanks to the fact that Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff won, then the Senate was tied 50-50. And obviously, since Kamala Harris is a Democrat, she's the vice president, she's the deciding vote. She is the tiebreaker. So that's what I mean when we say the slimmest majority. That creates an issue. We're going to get to the issue of the ties because you and I are very passionate about this, but we need to discuss, I mean, Georgia is the state where Donald Trump has literally been recorded trying to call the Secretary of State to interfere in the election. There's actually an investigation going on about this call. His chief of staff, was it, flew down to Georgia to try to interfere. If it hadn't been for Georgia, we wouldn't have control of the Senate. We would have the White House, which is what kind of baffles me. It's like he was obsessed with Georgia, and I don't know why, because he would have lost anyway.
Right. He needed more than just Georgia.
He needed more than just Georgia, but Georgia had not voted for a Democratic candidate for president in a very, very long time. Is it like 20 something years? Since
several decades.
Bill Clinton, I believe.
That sounds right. I'd have to double check. Yeah.
Sylvia did not grow up in this country, and my knowledge of history is. And Georgia has both a Republican House and a Republican Senate in the state legislature. And now these people, because the people of Georgia came out in droves and didn't just vote, and I believe broke records in their votes during the presidential election in November, they also came out again 2 months later, which takes a lot of work from those grassroots organizations to keep pushing people to stay politically active after they were already exhausted from an election during a pandemic year, during quarantine, when the economy is in shambles, people are dying left and right, people are getting sick, it's winter, and you tell them that they have to come back 2 months later, and they did. And because they did, the two Democrats won for the US Senate. So now those state legislators are like, let's see how we can screw these people over. And so that's why we see this Georgia voting bill that, according to them, it's just working on election integrity.
Well, I mean, we can give you many examples of how, I mean, it's a 98-page bill. There are a lot of provisions in that. And Stacey Abrams was asked to speak at one of these Senate panels. And one of the Republican senators specifically asked her, what are your problems with this law? Like, list them out for me, right? And then she started to do that. And at some point, he ended up cutting her off because, 2 minutes later, she's listing all these different things. And he's like, okay, clearly she came really ready. I don't know why he would have thought that Stacey Abrams, of all people, wasn't going to be ready for that question. But here's a really perfect example where, because of the runoff, right? So, they have the November election. We know as soon as they found out that there was going to be a runoff in Georgia, it used to be that it was 9 weeks later. 9 weeks later is when the runoff date happens. That's just how they do things in Georgia. And so in those 9 weeks, Stacey Abrams and LaTondra Murray and all these other people, LaTondra Brown and others worked. I mean, we should look to all of them as the model for what we need to be doing within our own states to get people excited and activated and going. I mean, what they ended up doing during that period, very specifically, was looking for and specifically trying to get people who turned 18 after the November election. So we're now eligible to vote in the runoff where they weren't in November. And the number of those people, again, young people that ended up getting registered was through the roof. And the number of them that voted was through the roof. So here's a very specific example of how the Georgia, this new Georgia law specifically targets that, which is in Georgia, you have to be registered to vote 29 days before an election. That's the date. 29 days before an election, you have to be registered. One of the things that they changed in this law was to change the runoff period from 9 weeks to 4 weeks. I'm like, okay, well, what do those two things have to do with each other? Well, the runoff happens in 28 days. So what happens is if that had been the law, it would not have mattered. They still couldn't have targeted those 18-year-olds to get registered to vote for this law because they would have already passed the deadline. So it's these incredible, I mean, you have to assume, and we like to call them dumb and we don't like them or whatever, but they are incredibly precise and incredibly smart about how they're doing this. Because on the face of it, changing a runoff from 9 weeks to 4 weeks, why would anyone have a problem with that? It's because it's masking the fact that it's a 29-day registration period, and now none of those people can then vote in the election. So you're only going for the elections of people who are registered before that. So it's that kind of precision that their voter suppression tactics, that's how they write these things in the bill. It seems like a no-brainer, but then you see what's behind it, and that's when people like me get angry.
Did you already do a TikTok video about this? Because I think it's wonderful math to discuss in a TikTok video.
Yeah.
And
I probably should, because they think the Georgia law, again, is all about voter ID. And out of the 98 pages, there's only one provision in there that has anything to do with ID.
And I don't have the numbers here, but we can put them on the screen. On the percentage of younger people that are voting not Republican, because a lot of the younger people believe in climate change. They are the ones that are going to inherit the planet that we're destroying, and they really, really, really want to save their home because there's no planet B. We've seen how passionate younger people are about gun laws.
Yeah.
Thanks to, for example, the organization March for Our Lives that sadly came out of a school shooting in Parkland, Florida. These people are voting for their lives, to stay alive in schools, to keep their planet alive. And so they're not voting for the Republican candidates. So they need to get rid of these younger voters. And they're doing it not just in Georgia, but Tokyo has another great example of another state that is it's very red, but is doing things to make sure that these younger people have a harder time voting. So why don't you tell us about this other state?
So again, when we think voter suppression, a lot of times we think about, they're trying to target Democratic voters and they're trying to target them in these swing states. They aren't just happening in swing states, as Sylvia was mentioning. So the state in question here is Montana. Montana very safely voted for Trump for president, right? And very safely voted for, a Republican president, and Republicans, Montana is Montana. It's very red. We do have one Democratic senator out there, just Senator Tester. But, again, he's very more on the conservative side, although he regularly votes for things, with the Democrats. So he is a Democrat through and through. But in Montana for the 2020 election, they saw a 40% increase in voters the ages 18 to 29. So a massive interest and increase in voters of that age. So the voter suppression bill they're passing is that you now need to have 2 forms of ID to vote. Okay, I don't know why one is not sufficient, but apparently needs to be 2. And very specifically, you can't use a student ID. So this is very targeted. Again, you're like, well, 2 forms of ID. We're just making it more secure. Again, on the surface, it's like, well, that seems kind of onerous. How many people have 2 forms of voter ID, right? I mean, do I have it? I do, but not a lot of people do. So, but to go after student ID, it's a photo ID. It's your university. Most of them are public universities. So you have all their information. Why would there be any concern about election security with a student voter ID card? There isn't any, unless you're trying to get rid of young people to vote and making it harder. Now, is it impossible for them to vote? No. But again, voting rights is about trying to make it easier for eligible citizens to vote, right? That is not what the Republicans are doing. They're trying to make it harder, and again, harder for specific populations to vote.
And like you said, it's not just happening in swing states. It's happening in Montana, which is a state that consistently votes Republican. Here's another example. Let me show you a video clip from Rachel Maddow explaining what's happening in Iowa.
Iowa's successful display of robust, easy participatory democracy appears to have driven the Iowa Republican Party batty. They have now decided that too many Iowans voted last year, and they are just not going to let that happen again. Iowa's Republican governor has now signed a law which bans the Secretary of State or anyone else from mailing out to everyone these applications for absentee ballots. That's the thing that made it so easy for so many people to vote by mail. If you do vote by absentee ballot in Iowa, your ballot will no longer be counted unless it's received by the time polls close on Election Day. Even if it's not your fault, it's the Postal Service's fault that it got there late. Oh, and by the way, polls will now close an hour earlier for same-day, Election Day voting in Iowa. Why did they shave an hour off the time that people are allowed to vote on Election Day? No idea. The law also cuts over a week off the early voting period, when more than half the votes were cast in the last election. They're cutting 9 days off the early voting period. Why? And if any local elections official takes any steps to make voting easier in an individual county, that election official can now be charged with a felony. This is really what Republicans are doing. They really did look at the most successful, highest turnout election in Iowa's history that had no problems. And they said to themselves, God, how can we make sure that never happens again?
We just gave you 3 examples of things that are happening around the country. But like we said earlier, there's 47 states trying to pass restrictive voting bills around this country. This is information that's coming from a very reputable source called the Brennan Center. I will include all the clips. I will include all of the links in the description below so you can follow what is happening in your state. And the good news is that there is actually a great bill that already passed in the House of Representatives to address a lot of these issues. It'll make it easier for people to vote. It would actually also take out the dark money out of politics. And it's called It used to be called HR1 when it was in the House of Representatives, or like it already passed. It's now S1, Senate Bill 1, also known as For the People Act. It sounds amazing, and it is amazing. And if you ask people, you just explain to them what this bill does, they love it. In fact, let me play you a recording of what happened when conservatives found out that Republicans also really like this bill.
Don't get into a fight in HR1 where you engage with the other side, where they have the talking points. HR1 stops billionaires from buying elections. Unfortunately, we found that is a winning message for both, the general public and also conservatives. That simple message, but far and away resonated with people. And when they had to compare that message versus tons of other ones, they were most persuaded by that. And they found that to be most convincing and most, riled them up the most.
Like when you take out each item and say this is going to happen, yeah, overwhelmingly Republican voters are behind it. Not Republican politicians, but Republican voters are absolutely behind it.
The problem is that for this kind of bill to pass in the Senate, it cannot pass with a simple majority. In the House of Representatives, you can pass a bill with simple majority and you're good to go. The Democrats have had a majority in the House since the 2018 midterms. They currently have a majority in the House, and we have, like I said, a very, very small majority in the Senate. However, the way things work right now, because of something called the filibuster, is that to pass a bill like this, they would need 60 votes. That means that they would require the 50 Democrats to vote for this and recruit 10 Republicans to vote for this. Now, we know there is no way in hell that 10 Republicans would vote for this. I mean, under no parallel universe could this happen. So here's where you and I get very worked up, clearly, about this. And I want to talk about something we can actually do, because just like you said in your introduction, political charge is, I mean, the name is perfect. Political charge. Let's just go. Let's not just sit in our seat on our chairs and be like, well, I guess it's going to get stuck. No, if you're frustrated because you see all these things that are wonderful passing in the House and then they go nowhere, it's because of this stupid requirement of 60 votes in favor in the Senate. I guess we agreed before we began this recording that we were going to tell people what to do about the HR1, also known as S1 and For the People Act. And I went on a tangent and got all worked up about reforming the filibuster. But I think those two go side by side, because even if you pressure your senators to vote for the People Act, no Republican is going to vote for it. But you should still call them and tell them that you want it, because all they care about is staying in power. And if enough of their constituents are talking about this, they're going to have to come up with talking points and come out publicly and state their position, which might anger some of those many Republicans I mentioned are actually in favor of this bill.
Yeah.
So I'm going to sip some water while you take charge, Miss Political Charge.
So, I mean, when it comes to a bill, I mean, I've never honestly been more excited about a bill, right, that was coming through, or that the Democrats wanted to pass. The reason why it has that one next to it is because that is their first priority. I mean, that's how important this bill is to the Democrats, and how they wanted to make sure that they were signaling to their voters how important they feel that this bill should pass. Again, it passed in 2018, but we didn't have the Senate. This time it's different. We do have the Senate, but again, the Senate rule, the filibuster, which really limits our abilities. So what I want to say about this is, to just kind of go into it real briefly, having automatic voter registration, right? You're 18, you're getting your driver's license, you're going to get registered, right? The fact that we would have, the states get to determine how they run their own elections, but there are certain things that the federal law dictates. Like, for example, you can't choose what day, you get to vote on president, right? There is a federal standard for things like this. So essentially, this bill is creating sort of guidelines and benchmarks that each states need to hit. Now, how they do that is still up to the state. So for people worried about states' rights and all that, there's no question there. These are just, call them guardrails that every state has to follow, but how they implement it is totally up to them. So there's not a states' right issue. Getting, dark money out of politics, not entirely, but by shining a big bright flashlight on these donors, some of them are going to skitter away because they don't want people to know that they're giving to these things, right? There's also all this about ethics, right? And making sure that Congress people are, upheld to the strongest ethics, which we can see from the last 4 years hasn't really happened all that much. Again, I could go on and on about this bill. Getting it passed, though, it really comes down to politics. And so I've really learned a lot more about the politics in, the House and certainly the Senate over the last 4 years. It does get very, very tricky. And so they have to build up, I hate to say this about my own senators, but, they have to build up the spine to really fight for something like this, right? So I think that they're starting with the COVID bill, very popular amongst everyone. Let's get that passed. No Republicans signed it, right? Even though overwhelmingly Americans wanted it, they still would not sign it. Now they're working on an infrastructure bill, right? Which again, overwhelmingly Americans across the board, Republican or Democrat or independent, want these things that we're talking about in the infrastructure bill. When I talk to some of my friends that are really, on the inside of politics, what they're doing is building this goodwill amongst the American people that Democrats are here to help them, right? It's not politics as usual. We're here to help you. At the same time, there's clearly a campaign within the Senate to try to, get the mansions and the cinemas. I mean, cinema has actually signed on to this bill. Manchin is the only one who hasn't. Are there any Republicans that would be swayed by the fact that so many Republican voters do want this? So there's clearly a sort of an internal campaign within the Senate to try to get this thing passed, right? And again, the filibuster is an impediment, but you can change the filibuster rules. You don't even have to get rid of it entirely. You can make sort of very careful slices of the filibuster rule to be able to pass. People are saying, hey, maybe we should get rid of the filibuster for election related laws. That's a possibility. So I think they're working on the politics of this. But yes, I'm also very impatient and I want this to pass, because every time one of these Republican voter suppression bills pass, I get more and more nervous about the 2022 midterms, right? If we don't have this S1 pass, although it's also going to take time for that to be implemented when hopefully we do get this passed. But in the meantime, these bills are going to be in place for the 22 midterms. And it's, again, we don't want to lose the House or the Senate. And so we're going to have to fight really hard for that as well. But as far as what you can do, which is what Sylvia asked me to do, first and foremost, you need to call your two senators. You need to call your two senators and say, I have never been more excited about this bill, or whatever it is that you want to say about it. Tell them what part of it you're most interested in. Dark money really gets you mad? Tell them, I want this to be passed for this reason. The more personal you can make it, the more they're going to listen to you.
If you don't know how to contact your senators, watch this video right here that I'm showing on the screen. I give you like an example, and even it has links in the description of how to find who your senators are in case you don't know.
So again, when you call, right, if you have Democratic senators, you're like, oh, they're already behind this bill. Well, like, it hasn't passed though, has it? No, you need to keep up the pressure, and you need to tell them, I need you to work over your colleagues in the Senate and get this thing passed. Here's why it's important. Call every week. I'm not joking. I call every week and tell them both. And I know that they're super behind it. Both of my senators are. I keep calling anyway, right? But the other thing is, if you have a Republican senator, they'll never pass it. They'll never pass it. Bring some of the statistics. Tell them about the video Sylvia just showed about how many Republican voters are behind this bill. Say your own voters want this, right? Use information that will get them to move. If they're not going to vote, they're not going to move because you're a Democratic voter and they don't care because you're not going to get their vote anyway. Well, then tell them about the people whose votes they are getting and how they want that bill. That's what I would be doing if I was calling, my Republican senators. So don't sleep on it, and do not let up, Democrat or Republican or independent, right, until this thing gets passed. This bill is literally that important.
I love it. And I do agree with you about how smart the Democrats are being, showing the people that the government can actually work. Because there's always the argument of like, the government doesn't know how to do anything. We should have small government. Excuse me. Do you remember where we were just a few months ago with the whole vaccination rollout and where we are right now? Thanks to the coordination of the federal government with all the state and local governments, it actually works. The COVID rescue plan that you mentioned also has great support from not just Democrats, not independents, but everybody has great support for it. And even though all the Republicans voted against it, they were trying to claim credit. There's multiple examples of Republican senators and representatives that were trying to get credit for things that are a part of the rescue plan that they voted against. And they got called out on Twitter by media and users. And then they just, what is it? Deer in headlights.
Yeah.
In 2021, a year when everybody has to be connected through the internet, and we find out more and more information through the internet, they can't believe that we're not paying attention. And there's more organizations and companies finding out how people are voting, what the representative was doing instead of voting. Companies that said that they weren't going to donate to the people that voted to overturn the election, and yet they restarted their donations. They think that we're not paying attention. It's like those people, the car salesmen that haven't realized that we already did all the research online to know how much the car really costs, and yet you want to charge me $5,000-$10,000 over the ticket price. Dude, yeah. I've done my research online and I have all this information, so I don't understand why you're trying to pretend like I don't know this.
We are paying attention.
Exactly. You gave us some really great action items that we can do to specifically talk to our senators, because this bill already passed in the House about HR1. But before we started, we also discussed what people can do right now to help fight against all these voter suppression bills that are passing in their way to passing, being proposed around the country. And it's not just our US senators, but also our state legislators. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about how we go about doing that, and what else we can do?
So the process for calling your state legislators is, just the same as calling your U.S. senators or your U.S. representatives, right? You need their phone number, and then you give them a call and you give them a piece of your mind. So the best site that I know to find the names and contact information for your legislators is called openstates.org. Really simple to get to. You just type in your address and poof, they both show up. You'll have phone numbers there. I think the biggest difference, though, is that, your state legislators don't have these massive staffs, right, that people in Congress do. And so it's interesting. I mean, a lot of times you will get their voicemail, because if they're in the legislature, there's no one manning the phones, right? They don't have a huge staff or anything else like that. But the other thing is, you could very well, if they pick up the phone, you might end up talking to your legislator themselves, right? And you want to keep it brief. Other people are trying to call them as well. So keep these very, very, very short conversations. Don't worry too much about if you've read the bill from top to bottom. Again, you are a voter and your opinion matters. So, you give them a call and say, hey, I noticed, right, that we have a bill working our way through to the legislator about, voter purges. And that makes me very nervous because, voter purges end up purging perfectly legitimate citizens who are supposed to be able to vote. You could even be more vague than that. You could literally just call them and say, look, I keep hearing, right, that there's so many voter suppression bills across the country. I know it's happening in our state. And I want you to know that as your constituent, as your voter, I care greatly about voting rights. And I want you to do everything in your power to make sure that we are making it easier to vote, not harder to vote. Poof, that's it. That's your message. You don't need to know the name of the bill. If you do, they do note that. So that's why, again, if you have the name or the number of the bill, that makes it easier. But you don't have to make your voice heard. That's what you say. You just say, I care about voting rights and I want you to make it easier, not harder. And that's all you need to say. So I encourage you to call your state legislators about this as well.
And one thing that we already talked about is a great, we want to call them organization, law firm, I don't know. It's called Democracy Docket. It's one of the sources of information that you and I rely on heavily, led by Mark Elias. You have seen this lawyer show up if you watch any kind of news coverage since November. I don't blame you if you don't, because you might be taking a break. But he's been on every possible news show discussing all of the lawsuits that he won against the Trump campaign. And he continues to file lawsuits against these voter suppression bills. So one other thing that we discussed before we started was the importance of donating and contributing to organizations like Democracy Docket, who are teams of lawyers fighting for voting rights in different states, and other organizations. We spoke earlier about Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams is the woman who didn't really, but okay. Gubernatorial race? Lost her race for governor in Georgia in 2018 to that man I talked about, Brian Kemp. And the great thing about her is that she didn't just okay, I lost, and then she went and sulked and disappeared. No, she decided to create an organization to fight. It's called Fair Fight for voting rights and make it easier for people to vote. Go find these voters, these young voters that are eligible to vote after the election so that they're registered the next time around. And those organizations are the ones that need a lot of these contributions to stay alive. Do you have any other ones on your mind?
Honestly, there are various organizations that do this. Democracy Docket is certainly one of them. As far as fighting legal fights, one of the things that I do is I see, so Mark Elias is filing these lawsuits on behalf of other organizations. And so again, if you follow Democracy Docket or just look at their tweets, right, and just sort of see who is he filing the lawsuit against, it's that organization, right, that you could send a donation to and say, look, this is for your legal fights, right? I want to help. So that would be another way if you want to be more specific, like he's going to be suing Montana, right? And you live in Montana and I'm really angry and I want to help. Go look and see who he has sued on behalf of and then support them with a donation. So you can do it that way. Yep.
Love it. Okay. I think we're going to wrap it up here because we have given a lot of people a lot to think about. I hope you took notes. And if not, I'm going to include all of the links you need in the description below. Follow Tokyo on social media. Why don't you give us your handles and how to find you on all of the things, because you're in all sorts of places.
Yeah, so my blog is at politicalcharge.org. At the bottom of most of my posts, I do make it really easy. You can click any of those links to follow me, but I'm at DHS Tokyo. That is the handle that I use on, let's say, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Facebook is under Political Charge. But again, if you go to any one of my articles on my site, there's links at the bottom of each article to make it really easy for you.
What is the DHS? It's not Department of Homeland Security. So
yeah, that's a trade secret.
Okay. And I am con Tono Latino on Twitter, tono.latino on Instagram and TikTok. And you can find me also on tonolatino.com. Thank you so much for sharing this afternoon with me. You and I have a pending coffee date in our future.
I can't wait. And thank you again for inviting me on. This was fun.
Okay, bye.